Hey, what's going on? So in this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to produce and compose an original piece of music inside Garageband using a keyboard. One of the most incredible features of the keyboard is that we can use it to compose and produce epic music inside DAW softwares, okay? And this video is going to teach you exactly how to do that, and I'm really excited for you to dig in. By the way, this is part of my full course, Unlock the Keyboard Alpha, inside Unlock the Keyboard Pro. So if you like this and you want to dive deeper and develop your keyboard skills, check out the link below and I'll see you over there. Good luck and enjoy. Alright, welcome to the fifth and final video in this seventh module. So in this video, we're going to be engaging in the whole creative process that we've been exploring in this module. And we're going to be doing it inside a DAW called Garageband. So Garageband is kind of like the beginner's version of Logic Pro, and it actually comes free with every Apple device. So if you own an Apple device, whether that's a Mac computer or an iPad or even just an iPhone, you already have Garageband and you can start using it today to make your own original music. Now, of course, there are plenty of other DAWs out there, and I do encourage you to actually do some research and look around at the other options. All of the DAWs kind of work in a similar way and serve a similar function. However, they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. Some DAWs are really good for recording live instruments and mixing and mastering them. Others are really great for like live looping and performance. And then there are others like, for example, Logic Pro and GarageBand, which are really great for using a MIDI keyboard in to create your own original music. But of course, they all share more or less the same production tools that we actually use to produce music. So whatever we look at in this video can most likely be applied to whichever DAW you choose to run with. It will just be a case of navigating a different interface and learning how to use that interface. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to kind of demystify the process of making your own original music inside a DAW. Because when you first jump into a DAW, it can be a little bit intimidating, right? It's a whole new interface that you have to learn how to navigate. There are all of these sounds that you can use, right? An infinite library of sounds, as I like to call it. As well as that, you might still be developing your keyboard skills and building your basics and your technical ability, right? I just want to get you started engaging in the creative process inside a DAW, making your own original music and actually producing it using the production tools that we have available and making it sound somewhat decent, right? You don't even need to know how to use these tools properly, nor do you need to know how to navigate a DAW properly. You can still get started actually just using presets. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're just going to be using presets. I just want to get you started so that you can be creative and inspired and excited about the creative process, and that will be what propels you forward and motivates you to actually learn how to use a DAW and how to use the production tools that we will be exploring later on in this video. Okay, with all of that said, let's jump in. Okay, welcome to GarageBand. As you can see, it's pretty much like Logic Pro. It looks the same and it's got the same interface. Now, don't make the mistake here of thinking that because it's a free and beginner's DAW that you can't make good sounding music on here. That's just not true, okay? GarageBand is still a DAW and it has all of the production tools that you need to get started. Remember in the last video when I mentioned that it's really good to think of a DAW as its own instrument that you have to learn, right? And in accordance with the basics principle from the fourth module, do the basics get 90% of the results, you can actually learn and practice all of the basics of these DAWs and of production inside these beginner ones, right? Before you actually invest in a more professional high-level DAW, okay? And that's kind of what I want you to do. I just want you to get started making music, engaging in the creative process, you know, working through these different tools, experimenting, see what happens, and then as you go, that's when you're gonna refine and actually learn how to use these tools and actually how to navigate the DAW. All right, so here we are with a classic electric piano. This is kind of the default instrument that loaded up. Let's just go ahead and see how that sounds. Okay, so that's fine. I want to play around with some of the sounds that I have available, right? So let's try Flying Circus Piano. What does that sound like? pretty strange. Well, it's a classic. Wide suitcase. That's quite nice. What about classic suitcase? Okay, that's all right. So in playing around with these sounds, I'm getting an idea of like which way I want to go. What is my inspiration leading me towards, right? This is the improvisation part of the process. We're just gonna improvise some ideas, and we want to kind of catch a thread of the song or piece of music that we want to create. Okay, when you jump in here, you've probably already got an idea of the kind of music that you want to create, and you want to follow that thread, and you want to find sounds that kind of suit that sound that you're aiming for. Okay, so what I want to create in this tutorial is kind of like a lo-fi beat type thing. Okay, now I'm going to show you a fairly standard arrangement of instruments in this tutorial, right? It's going to be an arrangement of 5 instruments, right? So we're going to have some keys laying down some chords at the start, and then we're going to lay down a drum beat. Then we're going to have a bass line beneath it. Then we're going to have some strings or a pad to create some substance and some body to the piece of music. And then we're going to have a lead synthesizer or a melody on top. Okay, so this is a fairly standard arrangement of instruments, and this is something that you could follow to create a fairly well-rounded piece of music that sounds full-bodied. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start with this classic suitcase, this keyboard sound, and let's just lay down some chords. Okay, now I'm gonna keep it pretty simple in this tutorial. I'm only gonna use 2 chords. Okay, so let's find 2 chords that sound good with this keyboard, and we'll start from there. So again, you want to engage in the improvisation step in this process, right? You want to improvise some ideas, try out some chords together. Okay, so yeah, these are some nice chords, right? So we've got F major and we've got E minor, and they sound good together. I like the sound of that. So in accordance with the composition principle of making decisions, I'm going to make a decision here that that's the chord progression I'm going to use, right? F major to E minor. Okay, so I want to get an idea of like tempo, right? So I'm just going to click along here. Yeah, that feels good. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, I'm just clicking my fingers, right? That's a way that you can kind of get a good gauge of tempo. But of course, the DAW actually has all of these tools within it, right? To help us get a good sense of tempo and a good sense of timing, right? If I was to click play here, you can notice that we have a metronome pulsing, right? So this here is the metronome, okay? And you can hear that, right? Now this metronome is pulsing at 120 BPM. You can see that here. It has an indication of the tempo. Okay, so what I can do here is I can actually try my chord progression with this tempo. Let's see how it feels. Yeah, that feels good. I'm happy with that. If you wanted to change the tempo, you could click this tempo gauge and you can make it slower. Right? That's too slow for me. I actually really like 120 BPM, so we're going to keep it there. Cool. And then this other button here, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's kind of like a count-in, right? So what that's going to do is it's going to give us a count-in before we can start recording this track, okay? So when I click this red button, which is the record button, it's going to give me a count-in, and then it's going to start, right? And I'm going to lay down these chords. Let's go for it. Okay, so that's actually all I need to do, right? So here we have the chord progression laid down in this track. Now, when you record something, of course, you want to go back and listen to how it sounds. So let's go ahead and do that. yeah, it sounds good to my ears. Now here's where I want to show you a major feature of the MIDI keyboard, okay? So if I double click this, we have this screen that pops up, okay? Now here are all of the notes that we just recorded, right? So that means that MIDI records digital notes, right? So if you were to record an actual instrument, a live instrument, right? Say if you set up microphones on a piano and you recorded that piano, you can't actually change the notes that are played, nor can you change the dynamics of those notes. You can change the sound of those notes and the sound of the piano, and you can use production tools to, you know, change the frequencies and maybe make it louder, make it bigger, right? But you can't actually adjust the individual notes that are played, right? Whereas with MIDI, you have digital notes that you can actually adjust. So MIDI recordings are very malleable in that sense, right? And here are all of the digital notes that we've recorded, okay? You can click on them and you can actually move them, right? So I could actually change this chord progression by moving these notes, right? Let's see what happens. Let's see how this sounds. I just moved some of those notes around. Let's see how this adjusted chord progression sounds. Okay, that sounds terrible. Oh, that sounds really bad, okay? I didn't actually put any thought behind where I was placing these notes, right? So if you can see this here, this is called the piano roll. So you can actually use the piano roll to create your own chords and your own chord progressions. And that's actually what some producers do. Some producers don't even use a MIDI keyboard, and they just rely on this piano roll to create their chords and their chord progressions. But of course, this is unlock the keyboard, and this is module 7. So hopefully you've already unlocked the keyboard to a certain extent, and you can create your own chords, and you can do your own thing on the keyboard. You can create your own melodies without relying on the piano roll. I tend to find this process a little bit more arduous. If you can actually play chords, I mean, you're golden. You're golden. You can do so much with that. Another great thing about MIDI notes is that you can change the velocity, which kind of means like how loud the note is. So if I select all these notes, I can raise the velocity all the way up. And if I select all these notes, I can bring it all the way down. And now we have some dynamics. Check it out. That's loud. That's so quiet you can't even hear it, right? So that is to say, again, that these notes are very malleable and you can adjust them as you go, which is one of the great benefits of recording music using a MIDI keyboard. Also, you can adjust the length of the notes, right? I'm feeling that these notes here in the first chord are a little bit too short. They cut off too soon, right? I can change that by actually extending them out a little bit, right? So that might sound a little bit smoother, right? It blends into the next chord more smoothly, right? It's a little bit more legato. Okay, I'm really happy with this keyboard part. It sounds good to my ears. Awesome, so I'm gonna lock that in. Now what I can do here is I can go up to the top right corner of the recording and I can click that and I can actually drag it out. Right? Let me drag it out all the way to here. Okay, so that's just gonna kind of loop for me, and this is a really good foundation for our piece of music. Okay, the next thing I want to lay down is a drum beat. Let me click this plus button here and create a new track. Alright, so we can navigate our way to the drums. We have two options here. We can go with live drum kits, right? So actual drums. Or we could go with electric drums, right? Electronic drums. And as you can see with the electronic drums, we have way more options, right? So again, you want to experiment with the different sounds that you have available. And of course, you probably already have an idea of the kind of music that you want to create in here. If you don't, you could just play around and experiment with the different sounds and see what you come up with. That's definitely a great way to do it. So let's just kind of play around with some of the sounds. Let me click on compact. How does that sound? That's quite interesting. What about cream soda? That sounds quite cool. That's nice. That's really nice. That's such a clean drum sound. So what I can do here is I can go back to the start, and if I click this button here, it's going to loop the section that is highlighted, okay? So this first part is just gonna loop over and over again until I turn it off. So what I can do is I can have these chords looping as I play around with the drums, right? Okay, that's quite cool. It's a really clean drum sound, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. As I said, I'm creating kind of like a lo-fi beat, right? So I want to have a drum beat that feels lo-fi. Now, the great part about drums and sounds in general inside the DAW is that oftentimes the name of them will indicate what kind of style they are, right? For example, if I scroll down here, you can see lo-fi feels. So that might be what I'm looking for in creating a lo-fi beat. Okay, so let me click on lo-fi feels. Let's see how that sounds. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. That sounds in the right ballpark of what I was aiming for, right? So what I want to do now is I want to improvise with the sounds that we have on this drum instrument, right? This lo-fi feels, right? Because there are all of these different sounds, even with the drums, right? Check it out. Let me just go through and play these different like drum sounds that we have in this patch alone. Right, so there's all of these different options, and I actually really like this sound. So I'm going to use that in my drum beat. And again, you can just like loop it and kind of craft the drum beat that you're going for. Generally speaking, if you want to keep it simple, all you need are the three main parts of the drums, which are the hi-hat, the snare, and the kick, okay? That will take you as far as you need to go. Honestly, that's like the foundation of the drums, just this standard drum beat, right? It's called the Boots and Cats beat if you don't know much about the drums. And the Boots and Cats beat can honestly take you so far. It's a really good foundation for a drum beat. So I'm just gonna lay down a Boots and Cats beat here just to show you that you can use the most simple ingredients to create something that sounds somewhat decent. Again, we've only got 2 chords on the keyboard here, just simple triads, right? All right, so I'm gonna record this drum beat, and again, it's gonna give me a little count-in and the metronome's on just to keep me locked in. Okay, great. That sounded and felt really good. Let's listen back to it. Great. That sounds and feels good to my ears. And because we've laid down a drum beat, I can actually turn that metronome off because it was getting a little bit annoying. And again, here I can see all the notes that I just recorded, and I can adjust them if I want to. Right, some of the notes might not exactly be on time, but I'm gonna keep this tutorial fairly trimmed and fairly easy to follow, okay? So I'm not actually gonna adjust any of those notes, and I'm going to decide that that drum beat feels good to me, and I'm going to lock it in. So let me drag this along. And there we have it. Okay, so we've got a really good foundation now. We've got some drums and we've got some keys laying down some chords. So the next thing I want to lay down is some bass, okay? So let me add another track here. All right, so again, we have 2 options that we could choose from. We could go with a more acoustic approach to bass, which would be this menu here. So this would give us our electric basses and our upright bass. So I could go for that approach, but again, you want to judge and approach everything from the standpoint of what kind of music you're creating. So I'm creating kind of like a lo-fi type beat, so I will go for a more electric bass. Sorry, a synth bass rather, right? So I can go down to the synthesizer section, and here we have a whole bass category. As you can see, we have so many bass options that we could run with. So let's just click on some of them and let's see how they sound. Okay, that's quite cool. So again, I can turn on my loop and I can just play around with some of these sounds. Now, again, to keep this tutorial simple, I'm just going to use the root notes of the chords that I've already established. So the chords are F major and E minor. So all I need to play are simply F and E, and that's a really great approach to bass, okay? If you want to have something that's just solid, you can just do root notes, and this will be a really great starting point for you, okay? So let me just play root notes here and play around with some of these different bass sounds that we have available to us. Okay, that's okay. Let me just play around. What do we have? Old school funk synth bass. What does that sound like? Not quite what I'm looking for. Noisy 808. Not quite. Definitely not. There we go. That sounds good. Finally, I found something that I like. Now, that's probably something that's going to happen when you start playing around with these sounds, especially the synthesizer sounds. Some of them can be really over the top and really intense, but that actually might be what kind of music you're creating, right? You can actually adjust these sounds, right? Synthesizers are all about turning knobs and moving sliders to adjust the sound, and you can definitely do that. But again, in this tutorial, I'm just showing you that we can actually just use the presets to make music that sounds somewhat decent, okay? So I kind of like this magical and new bass. I also like the name magical. So yeah, so let me play around with this loop and just find a bass line that I'm really happy with before I record it. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep it as simple as that, right? So I'm just holding that first chord. I'm just playing an F, right? The root note of the F major chord. And then I'm playing the root of the E minor chord, right? The E twice. Okay, so it's a simple rhythmic pattern. Boom, 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 right? As simple as that, okay? So let me go ahead and record that. Cool. Okay, let me go back and listen just to make sure that I'm happy with that recording. I want to drag this note a little bit later. Bring that closer. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So let me go ahead and lock that in and drag that across. Okay, so now we've got a really solid foundation, right? This is like the base of the music, right? Keys, bass, and drums. This is like, yeah, this is the foundation from which we can, you know, add a lot of texture, a lot of color, flavor, substance, body, all of these things, right? So the next thing I want to lay down is maybe strings or a pad, right? I want to give this piece of music substance, because so far we've got a lot of stuff in this foundation, but we don't have much of a body. We need some mid-range. We need something that fills out the space, right? And a really great approach to that is laying down either a pad or some strings, right? So let me go ahead and add another new track here. Now again, you could go for a more acoustic approach to this, where you could click on orchestral and you can find strings here. Okay, so we have a string ensemble. Let's see how that sounds. Let me turn my loop on, and I'm just going to play the same chords that we've already got, just the F major and the E minor. And I'm just going to keep it as simple as I can. I'm just going to stay with the triads again, right? The root position triads. Let's see how it sounds. Yeah, see, I don't like the sound of that. Again, we're creating a lo-fi beat, so I want to go with a more synth type sound, okay? And I'm actually feeling more of a pad. So let me click on pad here. And again, we have so many options to choose. So let me just kind of try some of these. What does Beauty Blubbers sound like? Okay, that's quite cool. I don't know if it's what I'm after. What about Breathy Vox? How does that sound? Yeah, not quite, not quite. What does Dream Voice sound like? Yeah, I kind of like that. That's not what I expected, but I actually really like that sound. Okay, again, I'm just using triads. I'm using the same chords that I used for the keyboard at the start, okay? Now, of course, I could try different inversions, right? You can try inversions of the chords. You can try a lot of other things. And as you actually improve your keyboard skills, you will, learn what you can do with chords, of course. But again, I'm going to keep things as simple as I can in this tutorial, and I'm just going to use these root position triads, okay? So I've already got an idea of what I want to play, so let me go ahead and record it. Okay, let's go ahead and see how that sounds. Yeah, it sounds and feels good to my ears. Let's lock that in. Okay, so this is in a really good place right now. We've got some keys, we've got some drums, some bass, and a pad. So all we need now is a melody on top. So let me go ahead and add another track here. And I mean, there are so many different approaches to melody that you could take. You could go with, again, a more acoustic option. Really, you could do anything with melody, so long as it stands out and so long as it's in the upper register of the keyboard, right? You can really go with anything. Of course, I want to go with a more synth sound. And generally speaking, if you want a good melody sound, you can go with lead. So again, we have so many different options here. So let me just turn on my loop and play around with some of these options. And as I do, I'm just going to improvise, right? This is all part of the improvisation step in the process. As I said, improvisation is a tool that you kind of need throughout the whole creative process, right? It's like the most important tool to kind of play around with different sounds, to experiment. And so as I kind of play around with these different sounds, I'm just going to start improvising some ideas. Now, refer back to the video on improvisation, especially the section on contained improvisation, right? Improvising over a chord progression. We have two chords to work with here. We've got an F major triad and an E minor triad, which means that we've got some chord tones, and you want to follow that process. You want to catch on to those little melodic ideas as they come. So that's what I'm going to start doing here as I play around with some of these synth lead sounds. Okay, so I've got my loop on. Let me go ahead and do this. Okay, so some of these sounds are really intense, as I explained earlier, right? What's Mysterious Synth Lead? Yeah, I like that. How does that sound with the music? Yeah, that sounds good, and I'm already getting an idea of what my melody is going to be, right? I was just playing around with some melodic ideas and repeating them, right? Catching on to those little melodies as they come. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm kind of like composing the melody, right? I've got my melodic idea and I'm kind of working around it until I get something that I like. And I think I've got an idea of what I want it to be, right? Okay, that was a little bit of a mistake, but I think I've got it. Okay, so let me go ahead and record that, and let's see how we go. Yeah, that was okay. I wasn't stoked with the performance. Let's see how we did. See, I felt like the timing of these notes was a bit off. These notes came a bit too soon. Again, this is the great part about MIDI recording. You can adjust the notes. They are so malleable. Much better. See, much better already. It was more of a timing issue. That note came too soon. I could, of course, just record the whole part again, but again, you can adjust the notes if you want to. That note comes in too soon. So does that note. This was a terrible recording. Everything's too early. Much better, much better. You can hear that, right? And you can actually see, this is the great part about the DAW, or one of the great features, is that there is a grid. We're mapping everything to this grid, and if you want to, you can do what's called quantizing, which means that you are actually mapping the notes perfectly to the grid. Now, I actually would recommend against that, because quantizing makes the music feel a little bit robotic, right? It makes it feel too perfect. And again, refer back to the previous module on making our music feel more human. We want our music to feel dynamic, and we want to sometimes bend with the time. We want it to breathe and feel alive, okay? And you definitely don't want to remove those human elements from the music and from the recordings, right? Because you definitely can. I could map all of these notes perfectly to the grid if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. All right, I'm really happy with that melody. I'm going to lock it in. So let's hear everything together to see how it sounds. Okay, that's great. We've got a whole piece of music here. Not really. I mean, this is the start of a piece of music. Again, I'm keeping this tutorial relatively simple just to show you that you don't actually need that much. We just laid down two simple chords on the keyboard, a simple drum beat called the Boots and Cats, a simple bass line playing root notes on those chords, a pad playing the same chords as the keyboard, and this synth lead on top, which is just a fairly simple melodic idea. Now, before we proceed with the production side of this tutorial, I just want to show you that you can kind of play around with the composition and the arrangement of these parts, right? For example, I'm feeling like I want to take out the drum beat here and bring it back here, right? And let's see how that sounds. Right, so that's just a simple change just to show you how you can you can take things out, you can rearrange it, you can do whatever you want, okay? It's so open to creative expression and freedom, really. And we haven't even got into the production tools yet, okay? So I really do want to encourage you to play around with all of this. And of course, you could add sections, right? You could have a B section. Refer back to the video on composition where we looked at creating a contrasting B section. So you could do something like that. I mean, really, there's so much you can do. And I really want to encourage you to be as creative as you can possibly be and to just experiment and see what happens, especially when you get started. Okay, now that we've got our parts laid down and we've composed this piece of music, we are going to finally progress to step 3 in this creative process, which is of course production. Now, in my understanding, production is all about making it bigger, okay? Making it all fit together in a really cohesive way. making sure certain sounds aren't too loud, certain sounds aren't too quiet, applying effects to these recordings to kind of adjust the sounds a little bit, and ultimately polishing the project and completing it, okay? The word production is all about actually producing something, okay? So you want to complete the project. You want to bring it to completion. And that's what we're gonna do in this step of the process. Now, just a quick disclaimer, I'm just gonna be introducing these tools to you and this process to you. It would require a whole nother course and a whole nother community around production for you to actually learn how to use these things effectively. So I'm just gonna be using presets on these sounds to make them bigger, and it's not exactly the best way to go about producing music, but it's a really great way to start engaging with these tools, and then as you go you would eventually learn how to use them properly. Okay, let's get into it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my keyboard, and I'm going to click this button here. That's going to bring up these controls, and I can kind of play around with these knobs to adjust the sound of this keyboard. Now I want to solo this track so that I can hear it clearly. I can do that by clicking this button here. Now it's going to mute the other tracks so we can just hear the keyboard on its own. Okay, now I encourage just kind of playing around and experimenting with how these affect the sound. So I'm just going to play around with these knobs and see how the sound changes. I think that's the best approach that you can take, just experimenting, right? Until you get a sound that you like and following your own creative intuition and your own ear, right? Cool. Ambience. Reverb. Yeah. Oh, I didn't have it looping. That's okay. Yeah, already the keyboard is sounding so much better, and I've just played around with the controls that are already available to me. So that sounds good on its own. Now what we want to do is we want to hear it with the rest of the music, okay? Now this is where you want to get good at actually discerning different parts in the music. I explained that in module 5. Having that ability to discern different parts is really effective, right? Because here you're able to kind of focus in on the keyboard and kind of hear how it fits with the rest of the music. I can't really hear it as well as I want to, but we're going to get into that when we go into mixing, which is a little bit later, okay? But for now, I'm happy with the sound itself, right? The tone. It's a good tone and I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to progress on to my drums. Let me solo the drums. Okay, so with the drum controls we have mix and we have effects. Now mix means that we have each different part of the drum and we can kind of, you know, mix those sounds together. Now let me just quickly explain what mixing is. Okay, mixing is a really important part of the production process, and it's essentially balancing the volume levels of the different tracks so that they all fit together nicely, so that some sounds aren't too loud and overbearing, and so that some sounds aren't too quiet so that you can't hear them, right? It's balancing everything together. A really great analogy I like to use is that when you're making a cake, you need flour and sugar and milk and eggs and whatever, right? And you can't expect to put all of those ingredients just into a cake tin and then put that cake tin in the oven, right? It's not going to make a cake. You have to put them into a bowl first and you have to mix them, right? You have to create a smooth batter, and that's kind of how I like to understand mixing. You're mixing it all together in a really smooth way so that it fits nicely and that it's cohesive. Now we're going to get into the mixing part in this process a little bit later, as I said, but for now I can mix these drum sounds. Okay, I want the kick to be a bit louder. Yeah, we always want the kick to be really loud, okay? You want it to be punchy. You really want to feel the kick. It's kind of like the heartbeat of the music, right? The snare, yeah, hi-hat, percussion. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now let's play around with the effects. Wow. See how that changes the sound? It kind of makes it close in on itself, right? That's the high cut filter. I kind of like that. That's very much in line with the lo-fi aesthetic, right? Drive. Reverb. Yeah, maybe a bit less reverb. Delay. Crush. It's a weird effect. I mean, it's kind of like 8-bit, right? So you might want to make like an 8-bit Nintendo type thing. That's cool, but it's not what I'm after. Yeah, okay, this is a cool drum sound. Let's see how it sounds with the rest of the music. Okay, I'm really happy with that, so I'm going to lock that in. Let me progress to my bass. Okay, so these are the controls that we have with the bass. I'm going to solo the bass track, and let me play around with some of these parameters. Yeah. That's quite cool. Okay, that's not quite what I'm after. LFO. Yeah, that's sick. Reverb. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm after. Let's see how it sounds with the rest of the music. Again, I'm trying to keep things as simple as I can here. I'm just showing you that I'm not actually doing that much, and I'm not putting much intention behind it. I'm just kind of messing around with these effects, right? When you actually get into this process and when you start learning how to use these tools, you can put intention into it, and you can actually really sculpt out the sound according to what you want to create, okay? The production process is vast. There are so many ways that you can adjust the sound. It's really infinite. Okay, let's progress on to our pad. Let's solo the track, and let's see how we can change these controls. Oh, that's cool. I like that. That's really cool. Oh, yeah. That's so cool. Add some more reverb. Okay, let's see how that sounds. Okay, that's awesome. I love that. Again, these just come with the presets that we've chosen. Like, how cool is that? That's so cool. There are so many ways you can change the sounds, and all we used is a MIDI keyboard, okay? I really cannot stress the point that the keyboard is like so powerful. Okay, let's move on to our mysterious synth lead. Let's solo that, and let's see how we can change the sound. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna keep it with the classic. That sounds the best to my ears. Let's just add some reverb here. Okay. Okay, we didn't really need to change much with that sound. It's already pretty good. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we just played around with the controls there to adjust the tones of the instruments that we've chosen. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add and play around with these production tools I keep talking about. There's only really two I'm going to show you here. I'm going to show you compression and EQ. Okay, so again, I'm going to go through my instruments systematically here, starting with the keyboard, and I'm going to click plugins down here. And as you can see, we have these plugins, and in fact, these are the two production tools that I'm going to introduce to you now. Okay, so let me click on compressor here, right? Let me solo the keyboard track. Now again, I'm not going to explain how these work or how to use them. I'm just going to show you that you can use presets to get started using them. A very crude explanation of the compressor though is that it tends to make the sound bigger. Okay, so if I click this button here, it's going to give me this list of presets. Considering that we're using a keyboard, I can go onto this keyboards preset list, and here we have a bunch of options. So let's just play our track, and let me apply compression. Let's try FET electric piano. See how bigger it became, right? I can actually turn it off, and you can notice the difference. That's off, that's on, okay? So let me just roll with that. And yeah, so that was just me using a preset. You can also be experimental with presets, right? You could try any one of these presets and see how it adjusts the sound to your liking. But of course, I do encourage you to actually learn how to use a compressor properly so that you can craft the sound with intention. But I'm quite happy with that. Let's see how it sounds with the rest of the music. Right, you can actually hear the keyboard now, right? It gives it more substance, it gives it more presence in the music. Of course, it is a little bit louder than the other instruments, but we're going to mix it all together very soon. Okay, so that's the compressor. Now let me click on this one, the EQ, right? So here we have an EQ. Now what this does is it kind of it sculpts the frequencies of the sound, okay? And you can do this by adjusting these parameters, but of course we're just going to use presets here. Okay, let me solo that. Let's try refresh roads. Maybe not. Yeah, that's okay. That kind of made it a little bit more high-endy. I don't know if I like that actually. What about piano pad warmer? You can probably see with this graph here how this is all working. Again, you can adjust these if you want to. We're just using presets. Let's try organ EQ. What's that gonna do? Yeah. Again, you can turn it off to see the difference. Okay, it just gives it a little bit more lightness, a little bit more presence. I'm just going to run with that. Let's hear that with the rest of the music. Yeah, it sounds good to me. And let's move on to our drums. Let's solo it, and let's click on compressor. Okay. Here we have a whole list of drum compressors that we can use. Let's try drum mix. Drum room. Oh, whoa, that's intense. Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds bigger. It gives the drums more substance. But it's a little bit more subtle because I felt that the FET live drums too intense. It's a bit too much, right? What did I choose? Opto drum kit. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay, let's click on channel EQ and let's choose an EQ for these drums. Let's go with refresh drums. Wow, see how that changes the sound? Let me turn it off. Oh, that doesn't seem to be working. That's okay. Let's roll with these drums. Let's see how it sounds with the rest of the music. That's awesome. I'm really happy with that. Let's progress to our bass. Okay, solo it. Click this, add compressor. Okay, let's go into the guitar section and let's go with E bass. What's that gonna do? Not much apparently. FET bass. Wow, see? The FET, I don't know what that means, but it sounds way bigger. Okay, let's try it with the rest of the music. Yeah, let's roll with that. Okay, let's add an EQ. E-bass EQ. Whoa! That's just way solid, hey? Yeah, I'm happy with that. That sounds big. That sounds full. Again, it's a little bit too loud now. It's overbearing, but we're gonna mix everything very soon. Let's go to our dream voice. Let's add a compressor. Seeing as it's kind of like a voice synth, let's go into voice. Let's see how this is gonna change the sound. Vintage limit. What's that gonna do? Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, let's roll with that. Again, I'm trying to keep things simple and quick in this tutorial. You can take as much time as you want playing around with the different options. Let's add an EQ. That's quite cool. What if we go to EQ tools? Yeah, so you can be creative with this process of even just selecting presets, right? You can see how these all change the sound so much. What's that gonna sound like? Okay, I don't like that. I liked my first option, which was, what was it? It was, I think it was choir overheads. Yeah, it just brings it up more. It makes it, yeah, it makes it lighter. Okay, let's see how that sounds with the rest of the music. Cool, I'm gonna roll with that. Let's move on finally to our synth. See how much bigger that became with this guitar electric compressor? Let's roll with that. Let's add an EQ here. Let's go with clean up guitar. Let's see how that sounds. Yeah, it's subtle. Yeah, I kind of like that. That's electric jazz bass. Of course, this is a synth lead. But again, it doesn't matter. You can choose whatever you want. Let's go with that. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, that sounds great. I'm really happy with that. So you could see how these production tools make everything bigger, right? They adjust the sound so that it just becomes so big and full-bodied. And that's what we want with our music when we're producing it inside a DAW. Okay, now we're actually gonna mix these sounds together. As I said, it's all about making sure everything's balanced, making sure everything is a reasonable volume. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is I'm actually going to lower the volume of all of my tracks, just so that we have more headroom to work with, right? We have more space to kind of adjust the volume of these sounds, right? So let me bring them all the way down here and let's see how it all sounds. See, it sounds already kind of not bad. You don't even need to know how to mix, right? It already sounds somewhat decent, okay? But of course, we are gonna mix this and we're gonna keep it as basic as we can here. So I'm gonna start with the drums because we want our foundation to be solid and grounded, right? So Move on to the bass. Keys. Pad. We want our lead to stand out, right? So let's raise the volume of the lead above everything. Yeah, and you kind of just want to play around with these sounds until you get something that feels balanced, right? So let me go back to the start here, and I'm just going to keep messing around with these sounds until I have something that feels good. Okay, there you have it. That feels good to me. That sounds good. Of course, there is still so much that I can do with this track in the way of actually producing it, right? I can adjust the sounds, I can adjust the volume levels, I can mix it better, I can, you know, change the sounds even more, I can apply effects, I can change the way that it's composed and arranged, I can even change what we've recorded here, right? This process is so free, it's so malleable. You can continue to kind of work and change it, but at the same time you have to get good at making decisions, right? That's what I talked about in the composition video. You've got to get good at actually making final decisions on the piece so that you can polish it and that you can actually produce it and complete it. Okay, that's kind of what I like to think of when I hear the word production. I like to think of actually producing something, finishing a project. Okay, that's actually the end of this video and the end of this module. I hope you enjoyed this one. This was a lot of fun for me to teach and share with you. I love the creative process, and I really hope that you're inspired to engage in the creative process and unlock your creative potential with the keyboard and with the DAW of your choice. Okay, good luck, all the best, and I will see you in the next module.